Ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich im Literaturhaus heute Nachmittag zu diesen Tagen internationaler Literatur aus dem Kaukasus. Wir haben mit leichter Verspätung oder anders gesagt kaukasischer Zeit angefangen, was uns die Zeit gab, Nino Gozalishvili per Zoom dazu zu schalten. Das Panel heißt Konfliktlandschaft Kaukasus und die Rolle Russlands, Conflict Landscape Caucasus and the Role of Russia. I would like to welcome Nasta Agrba and Najmin Kamilsoy on stage and Nino Gozalishvili also on stage but from home. Warm welcome to all of you. And I know you had a long journey to come here, so we're even more happy that you can here be today with us.
Thank you.
Und ich begrüße herzlich auch Jeronim Perović, der heute als Moderator dieses Panel leiten wird. Mein Name ist Isabelle von Natten, ich habe das Programm des Festivals für das Literaturhaus kuratiert. Als wir dieses Festival geplant hatten, vor Monaten im Sommer schon, habe ich das CEES kontaktiert, Center of Eastern European Studies an der Universität Zürich, ein Zentrum zu gegenwartsbezogener Osteuropa-Forschung. Und das CEES lädt junge Fellows regelmäßig nach Zürich ein, auch aus dem Kaukasus. Jeronim Perović ist der Leiter dieses Instituts und er hat dann auch dieses wichtige Thema vorgeschlagen für heute und die Gäste eingeladen, die heute sprechen werden. Sie alle waren auch schon Fellows beim CEES in den letzten Jahren in Zürich, kennen also Zürich auch schon ein bisschen. Und wir haben bisher über Romane gesprochen, über Gedichte, über das armenische Alphabet, über das Übersetzen. Wir werden jetzt nicht über Literatur sprechen, sondern über soziale und gesellschaftliche Fragen, über historische und aktuelle Entwicklungen, über den Kontext, in dem Literatur entsteht, auf den sie reagiert, den sie vielleicht das Wunschdenken auch ein bisschen beeinflussen und mitgestalten kann. Es wird auch um den Einfluss Russlands gehen und als wir das Panel planten, wiederum wussten wir nicht, wie brennend und auch wie beunruhigend gerade diese Frage heute sein würde. Das alles wird uns heute beschäftigen. I switch to English now, the language of the panel today. I'm very happy to see all of you here and people in the live stream at home. And I would like to hand over to Jeronim Perović for the panel.
Ja. Danke, Frau von Landen, für diese Einführung. 2 days ago, Russia launched a massive military invasion against Ukraine, a sovereign country, a member of the United Nations. What is happening right now is not only affecting Ukraine, but the larger Eastern European region. It's affecting Europe, it's affecting Russia's relations with the West, which are already now severely damaged and maybe will remain damaged for decades. Nothing is ever going to be the same after this. This panel deals with the multi-ethnic Kaukasus region, which in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union developed into one of the most explosive flashpoints of conflicts in the post-Soviet space. We now witness a war in Ukraine, but remember that the 2 Chechen wars in the North Caucasus, these 2 wars alone, left probably more than 100,000 people dead. And then there were other conflicts, like the one over Nagorno-Karabakh. There were 2 wars, which left maybe between 30 and 40,000 people dead. We had 1 million refugees. And then, of course, we had the wars in Georgia, between Abchasien and Georgia and South Ossetia, and these left several thousand people dead. This is just to tell you that war is nothing new to the region. They are accustomed to war, unfortunately, as is the Balkan region. We are not used to war. Now war has come closer to Europe. Of course, this war in Ukraine might have a much more devastating potential. You all read the news, and it's very worrying, to say the least. But now, today, we talk about the South Caucasus. We have 3 representatives from the region here. And we will also talk about how they think this all might affect, well, the way they live and work and engage with other people, but also the way these states of the region will develop politically, economically, because this will have an effect. Now, in this panel, young academics, artists from the region discuss these complex issues, and we'll also look forward. We'll also talk about ways forward for a peaceful future. Because all of these conflicts that I just mentioned in the Caucasus, they're not resolved, and they have a potential to escalate again. Now, on your left is, I introduced Nasta Agrba. She is a co-curator of Sklad, the first project for contemporary art in Abkhazia. And as a journalist, she writes about questions of architecture and society for the magazine Hara Hakalak. Sorry. She works on various artistic projects in Abkhazia with the Artas Foundation, which is located in Zurich.
Yes.
Right. And she was a fellow in 2002 at the University of Zurich at our center. Then I introduce, just by alphabetical order, Nino Gozalishvili. I'm very happy that you were able to join online. She came also especially, I mean, she traveled to Zurich from, where did you travel from?
From Tbilisi, hello.
From Tbilisi, especially to be here, but now she has to join online from Zurich. But I'm very happy this worked out. She's a PhD candidate at the Central European University in Vienna, and a guest lecturer at several Georgian universities, a research assistant at the Institute for the Development of Freedom of Information in Tbilisi, and her research focuses on nationalist, populist discourses in Central Europe and Georgia. Now, stay online. Stay online, right? And you hear us, and we can hear you, right?
I hear you perfectly. Thank you for saying that.
No, that's fine. Excellent. So, and then on your right is Najmin Kamilsoy, is a PhD candidate at the Charles University in Prague, originally from Azerbaijan. He has worked as a consultant and researcher for several international NGOs. His doctoral thesis is concerned with the development of civil society in the Southern Caucasus, focusing on the professionalization and its impact on citizen engagement. Now, before we go really into the region, I would like to put the question to all of you, of course. What went through your minds 2 days ago when you woke up and you heard that Russia was invading Ukraine?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And first of all, I wanted to say that it's really tough for me to speak about Ukraine right now, because it's tough to speak and to analyze something that, when right now in this very moment some people are dying or don't know what to do with their lives or don't know where to live. So, but then I thought that maybe if we discuss this, action and thoughts are still better than emotions, and maybe step by step we'll, I don't know, come to somewhere. So what I felt was first fear, a lot of fear and devastation, and second, there was a lot of shame, because my ethnicity is Abkhazian, and Abkhazia, you will know about this country later. But through my passport, according to my passport, I'm Russian. So I also vote for president. I didn't vote for Mr. Putin, but then I felt so much shame, and I didn't know how to escape it, to evade it. And then I read the news, and it was terrible, because right now in Russia there are two pieces of news happening at the same time, simultaneously: the official news and the agendas are completely different. And when you read more any of these agendas, then you, even if you are anti one of this agenda, you still start to understand the point of this or of that agenda. And then the official news say that actually the government is just protecting the people from Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and there was actually war happening these last 8 years, and now what Russia is doing is actually preventing the worst war, the worst scenario that could have happened looking like South Ossetian war in 2008. And the news from independent news media, which are now partially being blocked, and the Facebook in Russia is also has also started to be blocked partially. They say completely different thing, that this is the attack, and the Russian government wants to change, not just to protect these two regions, Russian-speaking regions with mixed population in the eastern part of Ukraine, where people really, most of people feel very pro-Russian culture, but that this Russian government actually wants to change the government of Ukraine. So actually, it's much more. So this is first. Okay. These are our first thoughts.
Well, Nino, if you can, the question was, what went through your mind? Where were you when you heard the news, and what did you think?
Yeah, well, I was in Tbilisi, and to be honest, well, naturally, this aggression of Putin's has really overwhelmed everyone, but people, especially people of my generation in Georgia. When we heard this news, it obviously triggered the same emotions and same feelings, same feeling of uncertainty toward the future. Now, maybe even more as we kind of got older than we were in 2008. And I think not only our feelings were similar, but also Russia's moves were similar, and his methods, Putin's methods, were also similar, starting with, reconstructing history of post-Soviet space, instrumentalizing history and providing, not only one narrative about one thing or another, but entire reality, right? He first offered the entire history of a nation, and then went on with the events that developed later. And well, I don't know if this gets spoken enough, but I really feel like this is one of the biggest instruments speaking about history of Soviet states, former Soviet republics, and creating kind of logical chain for Putin, which then justifies the actions, such aggressive actions that Russia is unfolding now. So yes, I think first there was this uncertainty, then fear, and now it's all about solidarity and supporting Ukraine. And I think I can proudly say and speak for my generation that they demonstrated, and maybe Najmin then later can speak more about civil society better than I can do, but this rise of real civil society and support towards Ukraine and Ukrainian people, this has been the tone in Georgia for several days now. Thank you.
Okay, well, we come also to the question of how this has concretely, or how do you think this will concretely impact your countries or regions. But let's go to Najmin. What came to your mind? You traveled from Tbilisi.
I traveled from Baku to Tbilisi, and then from Tbilisi to Zurich.
Yes, and just to complete the story, she traveled via Sochi by a cab. They took a cab because the flights were cancelled to Moscow, and then she took the flight to Zurich.
Yes, the flights were cancelled, and there was a chaos in the railway station, and all the people didn't know how to go. And then I was really hoping to catch my flight to Zurich, and then I found some strangers, and we found a taxi driver, and he went with us on this Karabakh trip straight to Moscow for 23 hours. And yes.
So just that, I think it's an important piece of information here. So you have to appreciate that she's with us, I think. So Najmin.
Yeah, I would like to start with actually expressing my gratitude to all of you for being here, because sometimes in our region we feel like there is not much of interest towards our region, and it's kind of an isolated region, more like a backyard of Russia, but it is great to see the level of interest here. As for the what was my reaction? Of course, it started in the personal level. I had when I saw the news, it was an emotional outburst for me, because also recently, more than a year and a half ago, there was a war in my country too. So it triggered all of the trauma and the grievances I saw during the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh. So I could relate, and I could see how fearful, how traumatic experience it is now in Ukraine, though the level of the aggression towards Ukraine is incomparably high. And then rationally thinking, I started to think that our region has increasingly, our nations, and when I'm talking about nations, I'm meaning the post-Soviet countries that are already not part of NATO or EU, our nations have become a hostage of Putin, and those who are trying to change it are increasingly being targeted by his regime. What is happening in Ukraine and what happened in Georgia in 2008, it was simply because of the foreign policy choices, of very fundamental choices of these countries. These countries wanted to integrate to the West, and they wanted to democratize their internal politics. And because of this very simple choice, they are facing war, they're facing atrocities in their country. And however, I was also in sense of a lot of admiration over the past 2 days, 3 days, for the people of Ukraine, because they are showing a resilience, admirable level of resilience on behalf of all of these nations towards Russian aggression. And they are fighting for democracy and independence for all of these nations. And it was great to see when I was in Tbilisi 2 days ago how the level of mobilization in the society, despite their government is trying to balance between Russia and the West now because of the security concerns imposed by Russia. The society is mobilized in a very high level and showing a lot of solidarity. I hope the other nations in the post-Soviet area, despite the level of fear of security threats of Russia, will show the same level of support.
Najmin, just one small catch-up question. In Azerbaijan, which is we can say, pretty authoritarian ruled country, which has always balanced Russia and Western interests very carefully, but still close to Russia, I would say, in some ways. What about society there? What reactions do you see to the war in Azerbaijani society?
Well, as the nation building in Azerbaijan has been very state-dominated process, so the popular perceptions of the people is largely affected in general, towards the West especially, is largely dominated and manipulated by this authoritarian regime in the country. But when it comes to Russia, it's a little bit different because people have real experiences under Soviet Union. And it's also important to know that the Azerbaijanis themselves have suffered a lot under the Soviet rule, even before when Soviet Union collapsed in 1990. Even during the Glasnost period, Gorbachev inserted Soviet tanks to Baku, killing around 200 people, civilians, just because they wanted to eliminate the calls for independence. And then there was this very traumatic independence period. Azerbaijan was stuck between the Russia and the West, and then there was a war, and basically Russia showed very kind of, how to say, triggering stance on the war by militarizing both sides instead of trying to mediate for sustainable peace. So among the Azerbaijanis, Russia naturally is seen as a security threat rather than a friendly neighbor. So what I have been seeing in Azerbaijani society, though there is no same level of freedom of assembly or freedom of speech in Azerbaijan, the same level with Georgia, but people are openly expressing their support to Ukraine. They empathize with Ukraine. However, unfortunately, it is not expressed in state policy. Just 2 days before Putin launched war with Ukraine, Aliyev traveled to Moscow and signed an alliance agreement with Putin that also kind of reinforced the military commitments to each other, but also the commitments to security of each other. So, though Azerbaijani government had in the past good relations with the Ukraine expressed support to Azerbaijan during the war 2 years ago. Azerbaijan is not showing the same.
You want to
Yeah,
comment?
I understood that. I think I really need to give you the context of the country of where I come from in the Caucasus, and maybe right now even in the reaction maybe of people to this situation, the war situation. What do you think? So I come from Abchasien, and I'm most sure that you didn't hear about this that much as of Azerbaijan or of Georgia, and this is a small country which. For the Soviet period of time, for more than 70 years, was part of Georgian Soviet Republic. And then with the collapse of Soviet Union, there was a war between Georgia and Abkhazia in 1992. And Abkhazia became, in the end of this war, independent. And there was a big struggling in the 90s when Abkhazia was fully isolated, including Russia. Economically and politically, and then in the 2008, Putin acknowledged Abkhazia as an independent state, and there are maybe just a few states in the world, like Nauru or Trinidad and Tobago, who also, acknowledge Abkhazia for some, what's the word? Benefits from Russia, I guess, right? So there, the situation was the following: when the war happened. Most people of younger generation were completely devastated and had
the war of 2008.
No. I mean the situation with the Ukraine. Sorry,
right.
Yes. Right now, younger people were devastated by the situation, and older people who are completely, very many of them, brainwashed in my mind with the television, with official state television, with the television of Russia, where everyone is saying that Donetsk and Lugansk are protected. They have different opinion, and also the problem with Abkhazia is that still Russia provides a lot of help, and Putin provides a lot of help to Abkhazia, and that is why many people also. Especially elderly ones, they are not that willing to oppose this in a way. However, Abkhazia for a long time did a lot not to recognize Lugansk and Donetsk, but right now with this situation, there was no choice. So I think it was yesterday when Abkhazia recognized them both. But there was no choice. It was for many years they didn't do it actually.
Well, okay. Thanks for this input. We will have more time to talk about this. But Nino, how do you see the situation?
Situation in Georgia or in the region?
No, especially in Georgia. In Georgia, what impact will it have on Georgia politics and society?
Well, on society, I I do see, and I second Najmin in that society showed this unprecedented solidarity and unity in these times, which is remarkable and which I think also speaks of the societal choice towards democratic and Western development. And this is something that has been written not only on Georgia's, strategic documents, but also what's been uttered by the society, by the people. But also, I would like to maybe go back and also speak about how Putin has represented Ukraine, and maybe this can also be a lesson or something to look at for people in Georgia also being, stuck between different narratives since 2008. So Putin represented Ukraine in two ways, right, over this maybe recent week. One was the Ukraine, which is a victim and has to be liberated by Russia, right? A victim in the hands of the West, to be broadly put. And also not only victim, but also a tool, right? The second kind of imagination of Ukraine or construction of Ukraine, if you will, by Putin was that Ukraine is becoming a tool in the hands of NATO and in the hands of EU to be used as a threat to Russia. So this is very tendentious policy of Russia in the region, not only, like as I mentioned above, creating history or providing new historical narrative, but also interpreting situation in a way that legitimizes Russia's dominance over the region, continuous dominance over the region. And even if this used to be one narrative that even people in Georgia, some segment of Georgian society kind of not believed, but made peace with, I think this Ukrainian case will make it clear, will make the Putin's clear intentions of restoring dominance and clear dominance. This is not, we are not speaking about soft power or anything alike. The clear dominance, some doctrine which Putin is taking from Ivan Ilyin, which, by the way, I found out recently that was that died in Zurich canton, the Christian fascist writer. So if he's taking his doctrine, but maybe this is becoming more clear to society in Georgia now too, and the things that happened in 2008, so more than 12 years ago, are also being responded in the eyes of many in Georgia nowadays.
Right. So I think what's important here is that by Russia's action towards Ukraine, Putin has sort of shown his true face and true intentions. This is, I think, the main point that you were saying. But at the same time, this makes the situation for Georgia extremely dangerous, because Georgia, together with Ukraine, they want to join NATO, and they have declared it. Now, after this, what's going to happen? If they want still to join NATO, and Putin has said this is one of the conditions, we will not let that happen. It's not just Ukraine, it's all additional Eastern European states. How do you see that?
Well, I cannot really tell you what's going to happen, whether they will be joining or not, but what I can say from my perspective and observations on the last week's event, at least the intentions towards the Western integration won't be damaged from these countries. That's how I see it. That's the least that we can say, observing this bravery of Ukrainian people, right? We cannot say that this determination and unity comes from, kind of backing up and saying no to the West or to NATO integration. I don't think that's the case. Well, to be honest, I also, and many people also in Georgia, never saw that Western aspirations were the only and sole reason for Russia to invade or to intervene in these countries. This is something that Russia has been instrumentalizing and kind of threatening these countries with, like, as if, you should stop integrating with NATO and then everything will be fine with you. That's not going to be the case. Just simply looking at the near abroad policy of Russia, there are always going to be imperial aspirations of Russia. So I honestly don't believe that this will affect at least the intentions of Georgia and Ukraine towards Western integration. But obviously, as the process is unfolding, we have to really observe how the West also gets involved and what will be the West's input and effect to the crisis.
Maybe one last question on this sort of more political or geopolitical level, and then we go to another level where I ask you more sort of your personal involvement. How do you think, Nasta, will this war affect relations between Abkhazia and Georgia? Because, they have been basically in a conflict, or we call that frozen conflict, with the exception of the war of 2008, for 30 years. Now, there has been some negotiation, they try to sort of find maybe some sort of arrangement. Could this all come to an end now after this war?
Honestly speaking, I think this war will not affect the process of the conflict between Georgia and Abkhazia in any way, because the conflict stays frozen. It stays to be frozen, and it doesn't evolve. And the actions that need to be done, in my opinion, from the point of view of Abkhaz, as I dare say, is that some actions could be done so that this conflict would somehow be resolved, or was on the way of being resolved. For example, if official Georgia acknowledged Abkhazia, but this seems so unrealistic for me in the nearest future. Or another thing, if official Georgia adopted a treaty on non-invasion, or this is the right word, right? Non-invasion.
Non-aggression.
Non-aggression. Sorry, yes, non-aggression treaty. So I don't see how the conflict with Ukraine can affect this. Honestly.
What do you see, Nino? Same question to you.
Okay. I think we should just put this maybe in the context from Georgian perspective. Georgia always saw agency of Russia between Georgian and Abkhazian relations very important and even decisive for some people. So now the acknowledgement of two regions, two Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia, by Abkhazia, I think will just strengthen this point for Georgians that Russian influence and agency when speaking to Abkhazia is huge. So unfortunately for me, from my perspective and for the perspective of people in my generation, maybe to some extent that I can represent, cannot be very optimistic in a sense that until Abkhazia is also kind of following or extending Russia's interest in the region in this formal way, as we saw last night, as we also read the very interesting text that followed this recognition. I think that will become the problem. I mean, we'll maintain the problem. As Nasta said, this is a frozen conflict, and at least this conflict cannot. I don't see how this can become a departing part in negotiating, just because of Russia's involvement again.
May I add something?
Yeah.
Shortly. Yeah. I think I completely actually understand Nino's point of view, because when you see how the Russia's influence, right? So, but I also understand that from my point of view, when I see it from my generation, and not only from my generation, from my society or so on, I just see that people there in Abkhazia really see Abkhazia as and strive towards independence and want Abkhazia to be independent. And there are many points in which Abkhazia doesn't agree with Russia, but I can speak with this later and so on. But of course, this influence still happens. But Abkhazia treats itself in this conflict as a conflict between Abkhazia and Georgia. But this is also kind of can be discussed later. That's what maybe.
But you want to add something on
the conflict.
the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Yeah, we were like previously talking about the balancing policy of Azerbaijan, but this one of the reasons for this balancing policy is the dependencies actually Azerbaijan developed, especially Azerbaijani elite developed over on Russia. Firstly, I mean, when Azerbaijan became independent, over the first decade of the period of independence, there was a real of course, we can also question the genuinity of this, but like there was European aspirations. Azerbaijan wanted to integrate towards Europe, also because Russia was not offering anything to Azerbaijan. Europe was seen as a power, both normative power, but also economic power, and also a market for Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan had big energy resources. But since there were many reasons why this has changed. Also, one is because Azerbaijani government took an authoritarian turn, especially when this energy exports increased to Europe when it started around 2004, and it's called oil boom period in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan economy grew in the speediest track. And it gave a economic confidence. Azerbaijan had no economic dependence on EU or on Russia, so it gave a lot of confidence but also a lot of resources to the elite to become more authoritarian. And especially after but still Azerbaijan was also had a lot of hopes that the West could help the resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. But especially after the Russian-Georgian war in 2008, these hopes that diminished. And also there was a clear disillusionment in the elite level on the Western engagement over the Karabakh conflict. So in the elite view, Russia is the only actor that can help solution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And this is additional dependency that creates and there is this threat that if Azerbaijan at some point, for some reason, worsen its ties with Russia, Russia will do the same and recognize the independence of Nagorno-Karabakh. So this is one of the fears. But also there are other dependencies, like there are 2 million Azerbaijani workers moved to Russia after the independence. This is a big economic power in the hands of Russia. And also there is a lot of soft power of Russia in Azerbaijan. There are free, the Russian education in Azerbaijan is free, so everyone can choose studying in Russian. There are Russian media, very powerful in Azerbaijan, although Azerbaijan removed all Western media from the country after taking this authoritarian turn. There are a lot of, cultural influences and more, and also influence over the elite for this and that reason. So so in this context, also it is what is happening in Ukraine will lead to further distancing of Azerbaijan, unfortunately, from the EU. But much will also depend, of course, how this will continue, what kind of support will be offered to people of Ukraine, what kind of security guarantees will be applied there.
Yeah, just to remind the audience, when it comes to hard power, of course, we have to talk about hard power, although we don't want to. We are intellectuals, we want to talk about other things, but you see what happened. Russia has military bases in Armenia. It has a new military base on Azerbaijani territory, on and around Nagorno-Karabakh, which is new. And of course it has military bases on the territory of Georgia, in Abchasien and South Ossetia. Just to tell you the role Russia could potentially play as if you want, not a creative, a good force, but as a force of destruction, if it wanted. If worse came to worse, it could use that force. And no other power has that force in the Kaukasus right now. We're talking about Turkey, but they don't have a military base. They might help Azerbaijan, I'm sure, but they don't have a military base. So, sorry for giving you this bleak picture, but now I think we should move on to a question which, when you heard Putin's speech think 3 or 4 days ago, when in this long speech about history and why Russia and Ukraine belong together and about the Soviet Union. If you heard it, I'm not sure you heard it. It was about 1 hour. It was a long speech, and I think it was sort of the initiation of the conflict. He represented the Soviet Union, sort of a construction where everybody was happy, right? And the Soviet Union and also the Russian Empire, before they managed to sort of bring all these people, and we're talking about hundreds of different nationalities during this time together, and they lived more or less in harmony. And the crash of the Soviet Union, it was the crash that actually provoked all these conflicts. And this is why it should be only natural and only in the interest of the people to somehow come together again. Now, sorry to be so cynical about this, but still, you belong to a post-Soviet generation. You have not experienced the Soviet Union. And when you hear that, maybe not in Putin's speech a couple of days ago, maybe in other contexts, can you relate to this in any way? This would be my question. Who wants to start?
Okay. Well, really, I haven't experienced the Soviet Union, but I've read lots and lots of diaries and books on lagers, on repressions, on Stalin regime, and honestly speaking, I think in a very utopian form. There are some pluses in such a union in the future, if they're in a reformed version of this union, if it were a union based on a perfect mixture of ideology and economy. And for example, EU or United States or even Switzerland, the very first cantons, as much as I understood, reading the history of Switzerland, they united based on the principle, based on the idea of economy, of that they understood that it's better to be together. So yes, my dad said that in the last years of the 80s, when the Soviet Union started slowly to collapse and more opportunities and possibilities opened, there was a very interesting period when all these nations started really very interestingly and actively communicate with each other, right? Like from some, emerging businessmen, young businessmen from Latvia or Lithuania started to cooperate with people from Kyrgyzstan or somewhere. And it was a great process. And he said, wow, if there was this mixture, and it stayed, this mixture of first a free economy, but second some law, or in that case ideology based on fear that kept people kind of in the norms of the law, right? Mm-hmm. Then maybe some good things could happen, But this is like the utopian, speech. But of course, in reality, I think what Putin says, it's just a populist thing to justify his, his actions. Because,
well, I think he actually believes it, which makes it worse. But let's go. I mean, do you have any response to that, Nino? Do you see it differently?
Yeah. Well, I have to start commenting on this as the, if I may, specialist of nationalism studies, and in this field, after hearing Putin's speech, everyone has been. This is something that you learn or teach in the first classes, that all the nation states are constructed. This is all the prevailing theories of nationalism have long established that modern nation states are constructions, and they are not naturally existing entities. Obviously, Ukraine, what he said there, was just as constructed nation as was Russia or Georgia or France or any other state. So that was very simple manipulation by his side. As for the Soviet and post-Soviet developments, I don't know, I always believe those historians who say that all the post-Soviet conflicts, which we sometimes call ethnic conflicts, but not everyone agrees with that. People sometimes put more agency to Russia, and they don't call this ethnic, but rather politically motivated conflicts. But leaving this aside, a lot of historians believe, and I also follow them on that, that all these small bombs that exploded in post-Soviet context were already put there during the Soviet Union. And if you look at the nationalities policies of Soviet Union, this very well-known nativization and Korenizatsiya policies, then it might help us explain very well what happened in post-Soviet context and why do we have so many conflicts on such a small, like as you had now on the map. It's not a very big region, but we have a lot of defining conflicts. So yes, one explanation from my perspective is exactly at looking at the Soviet nationality policies. And well, as we also know, and we have to remember in this case, that the main category of division also in Soviet Union was ethnicity, right? If people had it on their IDs written, which ethnicities they presented, and what's more important, and maybe something that Putin is right for, is that Soviet Union created these nominal and like autonomous regions, and kind of emphasized that there were Georgians and I don't know, Ossetians and Abchazians and Azerbaijani and smaller nations, smaller ethnicities. So ethnicity became the main category that was left after Soviet Union as well. There was very little history or no history at all of statehood or any state structures. So well, that was already predetermined. Mm-hmm. And as for the reframed or reformed Soviet Union, as you will, I honestly cannot really imagine any real perspective of this, following Nasta in this, having read so many about repressions and about bloody suppressions of any pursuit of liberty or freedom by people. And also we have to remember that this was all eliminated from history. People never stopped fighting for freedom in at least in South Caucasia, and what I know more in Georgia as well. But this was not written in history. We just have to unfold these histories of these struggles, but also taking the list of the economic struggles that people actually had in Soviet Union, and this was not spoken about, the corruption at all levels of the state, which was there by the 60s or especially 70s and 80s, and fading ideology, right? I could not find a lot of people by the end of Soviet Union who truly believed that the state could, reach its intention it had. So I honestly find it very hard to imagine the reformed version of that system. I would even say that maybe it had this self-destructive element into it, considering all these issues that I just listed. But yes.
Right. Well, maybe thank you very much. Maybe for the audience, just I think very simple. The Soviet Union was always a federal state on paper, of course. So you had ethnically defined parts. Ukraine was on the highest level. This was a union republic, and at the end you had 15 of those. 15, and Ukraine was one of those. Georgia was one of those. Baltic states, Belarus, and so on. And within these union republics, you had other ethnically defined, so-called autonomous units, like Abkhazia was, South Ossetia was, Nagorno-Karabakh was in the context of the Union Republic of Azerbaijan. So while the Union Republics had the right, even by constitution, to secede from the Soviet Union, the status of the autonomous, ethnically defined regions inside Union Republics was not so clear, and war broke out over precisely this question, and in fact we have the consequences until now. Now, a different case, of course, is Ukraine. It was always a union republic, and what's happening now is only the second time two union republics wage war. The first time was Russia and Georgia in 2008. The second time we see now, and it's about something else. But this is a very complicated issue. It all did not matter as long as the Soviet Union was a communist state, because the Communist Party held everything together. So when the communist ideology crumbled, the federal structure came to the fore, and then the whole thing started sort of to disintegrate, as Nino rightly explained. But it is a very complicated story. I think we should just have another session for this.
Yeah. Maybe when I can, the thing is that I would like to talk about this the revision or updated vision of Soviet which Putin has in the terms of from the from the perspective of Azerbaijan in terms of generational change, because the previous generation, which spent some of their life or most of their life in Soviet Union, you can already also sometimes hear that there is this nostalgia, especially in the context of Azerbaijan, because over the past 30 years, Azerbaijan did not manage to provide to establish a welfare state, provide social. A responsive social policy to citizens. It did not eliminate corruption, and so there is a certain level of nostalgia in the older people that their lives were totally different. They were provided at least some life by the state. But this is something that they are struggling with now. However, with the newer generation, there was no experience with Soviets. There is simply no connection with Soviet Union. However, it's important to note that there is a lot of and also there is this in the younger generation and also older generation who fought for independence. There is this sense of statehood, very strong sense of statehood. They want to see Azerbaijan as an independent state, although in foreign policy context, this independence is limited to some terms. The Soviet connection lost for the new generation. But important to mention that the Soviet legacy in Azerbaijan has not disappeared. The Soviet legacy of these informal relations is still there. Soviet legacy of corruption is systemic corruption, day-to-day corruption is there. And Soviet legacy of distrust to the others is still there in Azerbaijan. And people are, the vast majority of people in this country is apolitical. They have no engagement in politics. They have no involvement in, let's say, political parties or civil society, which has been already, eliminated by the government. But there is a limited interest in participating in politics, even among the young generation. So this has been passed from generation to generation, this Soviet legacy. So this is not only applicable in the context of Azerbaijan, but it is applicable to a lot of countries in Central Asia too. And this is something, this Soviet legacy, the prevailing Soviet legacy, is also something that I think emboldening Putin to revision this idea, because he sees that this Russian system of governance is also there has similarity in this. It maintains this similarity in the countries in the neighborhood too, and unfortunately this has not been changed over the 30 years.
And to some authoritarian rulers, this is a very attractive system. He intervened in Kazakhstan to make sure precisely this kind of authoritarian regime is not toppled by demonstrators on the street. And now, this is my last question, then we open for questions to the audience. When Ukraine, I think the really big change in Ukraine, they had several revolutions, of course, but I think the really big change came, of course, with the Maidan. So we can talk about politics, we can talk about regimes, we can talk about everything. But what you cannot really foresee is society, the dynamics in society. And you saw that in Ukraine all of a sudden, and sort of to the also astonishment of the rulers, of course, there was these huge gatherings on the Maidan, which eventually brought down the regime. Now, what's the way forward? I mean, in Georgia, of course, this is a different situation when you talk about society, when you talk about NGOs. You have that. You are past this, although there is always a danger, of course, of falling back, and you know this better than anybody else. But still, also in Azerbaijan, maybe even in Abkhazia, what about let's call them the people or the younger generations who say maybe in Abkhazia, we're fed up, we don't want to be isolated from the world and also be seen as sort of an appendix of Russia. We want to move forward. we want to have good relations with Georgia and with other states. I mean, what's the way forward for your countries or for your societies? Let's start with you.
Yeah. Yes, it's an aching question, especially due to the fact that Abkhazia is the country with a very long history and with its own culture, with its own cemeteries, with its own very specific language, and with a long aching history of also big conflict with Russia in the 19th century, and then with the immigration of lots of Abkhaz to the Turkey in the 19th century, and then because of this conflict with Russia, and then with these 70 years of Soviet regime, when there was change of geographical names into Georgian names, when there was closure of schools, when there was oppression of intelligentsia, and
from Georgians, from the Georgian side.
From Georgia, from the official Georgians, because it was the part of the Soviet regime initiated by Stalin and Beria, and the thing is that Abkhazia actually in the 90s had this very interesting beginning of the way towards independence that Abkhazia did itself after the war, and despite being isolated by the whole world and the Russia in the first place, Abkhazia still strived towards this independence, towards building these institutions, and it started to work slowly. Its civil society, very strong one, started to work slowly with NGOs, with European NGOs, and in the 1999 there was a referendum where peoples of Abkhazia said that yes, we want to be independent. We do not want to be either with Georgia or with Russia. I mean, it was the voice of them, and that's why I also think that actually when Putin recognized Abkhazia in 2008. It was not only because Putin wanted Georgia not to enter NATO and he wanted to have this buffer zone and so on, but also maybe because they understood that actually Abkhazia, they can lose access to Abkhazia if they do not act towards it, and they do not provide this social economic help package and so on. So for now, I actually told all this just to stress that Abkhazia is just not a fake entity, and it's really a country and a culture with its own language, with its own very long history and culture. These people, and these people really want to be independent. And as I see it, well, it would be great first as solutions. About the isolation. Isolation can also be overcome with the help of Europe, actually, and with the help of Georgia and with the help of Europe. For example, if Europe started to acknowledge Abkhazian passports, not as even if Europe didn't recognize Abkhazia as a state, but they acknowledged, Europeans acknowledged the Abkhazian passports as travel documents, this would somehow sustain the basic principles adopted by the United Nations themselves. For example, the right for education, the right to move freely, right? For free movement or so on. So there are some precedents happened in the world with, for example, in Taiwan or in Northern Cyprus, when states didn't recognize the state, but they recognized the travel documents and they allowed the people to travel, to have the education, when there were more scholarships. Second thing, if the treaty on non-aggression, right? Non-aggression was being adopted by Georgia, that would be a great step forward, because then there would be no fear for Abkhaz that any day Georgian troops could come. And I also think that this would improve the relations between Georgia and Abkhazia very much. All these actions, I think, would really help. And also, of course, these negotiations talks that happen in Geneva every year between these multilateral talks between Georgia, Abkhazia, and Switzerland as a mediator. And there lots of events happen concerning ecological and cultural exchange and exchange of archives, for example, of some really important treasures of the countries and the archives. And the talks are happening, and I think they have to continue. So I think all this would have helped Abkhazia to feel more independent from its senior partner right now, which is Russia, and to act more independent. And of course, we cannot demand this because we do not have any stage to demand this, any international organization where we are represented. But we can only ask for this and only ask for people maybe to know about Abkhazia more, because believe me, it's a very beautiful country with a beautiful culture and beautiful people and very hospitable and great nature. But this is from my small tourist firm.
And I think,
but that's true. That's true.
And I think so is Georgia and Armenia and Azerbaijan. These are beautiful countries.
True. They are, of course.
So, Nino,
Food especially.
The small advertisement.
What's your take? Do you want to respond to this, or?
Sure. I mean, I'll just pick up maybe from your question, Jeronim. Well, I don't know. Lately, this last week, it got me really thinking. I mean, I was thinking about this before as well, but now really understood the meaning of the past and Soviet past. I really think that Soviet past is still very, very important for our entire region, in a sense of that it is the essential analytical lens. Like, I don't think we can truly go through this democratic transformation or any other sort of transformation these countries choose without rethinking and labeling history and understanding the history. Otherwise, I think we are bound to making the same fallbacks. If we come to explain the ethnic tensions with the Soviet policies and the Soviet history, then a lot of problems and challenges we're experiencing now, they can be also at some point explained through what we went through in the latest century. And every historian probably in the room as well would agree that this is the least re-evaluated and rethought history. And still a lot of people, like big part of society, does not take this criticism, critical evaluation of history very well, which is understandable. Obviously, you don't want, and no one wants to hear that they spent half of their life in a different reality than they thought they spent, right? So this is still the challenge in the South Caucasus and especially in Georgia, where we have these attempts, but then these attempts are sometimes very harshly responded by some part of society because, we have to admit it, Soviet propaganda machine was one of the rarest and very, very strong. So I think this could be one step that we definitely need to establish a narrative of history. Also, we have a lot of competing narratives, right? What Abkhazian people tell and what some Georgian people tell. The problem sometimes is not agreeing on historical narrative, what actually happened and how it can be, how can we negotiate or speak about it without external, in this case, Russia's biggest involvement. So, and then about future hopes and what can develop, I'm very thankful that you spoke about Georgia in the positive terms. I also agree that we had very positive developments in terms of some democratic trends setting in the country, but lately this has also been under the challenge. I don't know if you do follow some evaluations of Georgian democracy lately, but there are definitely challenges to independent judiciary, which is one of the main problems now, or democratic governance. There were attempts to multi-party democracy, which is also one of the key cornerstones of democracy, and we are still struggling in that area. But again, I would maybe repeat my hope or my belief that Georgian society has not changed its aspiration towards democracy and towards Western integration. So that's maybe one positive thing. If we come down to the roots of democracy, basically that's people's will, right? People's decision. So if we see people uniting over these sort of issues, if we still feel people feeling strong enough and not scared that they come out to the streets in support of Ukraine, never, regardless what their government says, I think there's still a hope for better development, and I hope that there will be also reception in Georgian society for critical evaluation of Soviet past as well. But at the moment, I think we still need to invest a lot in researching our past and be more open to see critically what we actually went through in 20th century.
Well, thank you. And this is precisely why we established also this fellowship program, which is, of course, interdisciplinary, but it's located at the historical department at the University of Zurich. This is no coincidence, because I also think, of course, being a historian, that you need to at least accept that there are different narratives and different realities. This would be the first step. You don't have to accept that the other is right or wrong, because there's no such thing in history as an absolute truth, but at least accept that there are different realities and different readings of history, and not just one victim and an aggressor and all these kinds of things. And of course, this goes for the Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict, which I think is one of the toughest to have, and one of the oldest in the Kaukasus. And do recent developments make it any better? Do you see that now that at least, militarily, the situation has changed, and Azerbaijan maybe got some parts of what it wanted, it can open is this also a window of opportunity for these two countries to move closer? What do you think?
Well, before the war, and during the war, I was against I am still against a military solution to any conflict, including the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. But it should be acknowledged, should be acknowledged that what Azerbaijan tried to brings as a solution, maybe what they consider as a fair solution, returning back to occupied territories, it was done through authoritarian peace-building method. Azerbaijan got back the territories that it has lost during the 90s, and it wants to now set the agenda of peace-building according to its own interests. What unfortunately we are missing here is the agency of the people. This conflict resolution, no matter before the war, no matter now, is completely dominated and monopolized by the governments, including Azerbaijan and Armenia. Although there is bigger civil society, more vibrant civil society, especially after the revolution in 2018, there is now vibrant society in Armenia. However, the solution of the conflict is still monopolized in the hands of the governments. So although now there is more discussion of the peace, now there is more meetings between the leaders, and they set out certain measures to reach to this peace through economic transportation and more. What is still missing is the people-to-people contact. You can develop economic relations, which will eventually contribute to the peace. You can develop transportation, which will positively contribute to the peace. But once there is no people-to-people connection, once there is no the collective trauma is not healed by communication to each other, there cannot be a sustainable peace. And especially in the non-democratic context, considering that Azerbaijan is not democracy, Armenia has still fragile democracy, it's very easy to trigger the hatred in the society, since there is a big societal control. There is big control over society. So here I think there is also, Russia, we were talking, is the main actor, as also bringing the sides to the table, the government. But there is also a lot of role that the West, the EU and Switzerland and US can take to engage more with the society, with societal actors. Real societal actors, trying to bring them together to talk about different stuff, not necessarily about politics. I think this kind of opportunities is very important to make these connections, and which will eventually will lead to societal opening and opening to more exposure to each other.
Well, okay, thank you very much. I think just one thing, you talked about people-to-people contact. At least here we have people-to-people contact also between somebody from Abkhazia and somebody from Georgia, which I tell you is, well, it's not a rare thing, but it's not so common. Would you say that?
Well, in Abkhazia, no, it's not so common,
Right.
though I have friends who are Georgians living in the district of Abkhazia, Gal, where some Georgians are living, and I have some relatives who, through some uncles, the husbands of my aunts, have Georgian family names, but still, it's very rare thing when you are in Abkhazia, But may I add a short notice?
Short.
Yes, very short one. Just to what Najmin has said about EU influence, I just wanted to say that personally, I sometimes am very envious on the influence that EU and US did on Georgia by renovating its institutions, and I sometimes think that Abkhazia would be, would profit from some know-how, and so on.
Right. Well, okay, thank you very much. I think let's take maybe a couple of questions from the audience. But short questions. Short.
Hello. Okay, really need it. My name is Elena Kapatadze, and I'm Georgian. And I'm urged to ask questions to all of you, participants of this panel. As far as you presented yourself in the introduction in your capacity as academics, I think expectation from that, or your obligation, is to use concepts that are accurate and are based on scientific evidence or conventional wisdom of factual information. We are sitting now, we are in Switzerland. Switzerland is a mediator country between Georgia and Abkhazia. And calling Abkhazia the country and not correcting the speaker is totally misleading this audience, because Abkhazia is recognized by UN and all its participating states, including Switzerland, as occupied as Georgian territory occupied by Russia. And Georgia is 5,000 years old. There was no Russia and no Abkhazia at that time. And Abkhazia was always part of Georgia, and I lived there. I was raised there, and I had Abkhazian friends. My parents, my grandparents had Abkhazian friends. They worked in they established a university in Abkhazia, and I loved these people. And it wasn't a war between Georgia and Abkhazia, it was a war between Georgia and Russia. Russia punished Georgia for our ambitions to become independent country after collapse of Soviet Union.
Right.
And
Okay.
by the way, I
think you made your point.
No, I didn't.
No,
I didn't, because
the thing is when you say
yeah.
we shouldn't use the name Abkhazia, I'm very aware that this is a problem, right? I never said Abkhazia is an independent country.
She said,
I think we showed the map. Well, she can say whatever she wants.
but I mean,
we never said
consumed the
we never.
information, and it's a misleading information.
Well, that's what we are here to talk about. But from this, let's say, from here, from the panel, or from showing you the map, I never said Abkhazia is a internationally recognized independent country. It's still part of Georgia from a legal point, of view. We all know this, and I would never dispute that. But de facto, Abkhazia has been independent from Georgia for almost 30 years. So we should start to think about a way forward, right? That's it.
But it's
Historically, precisely, we should start about talking about it and acknowledge that we have to look forward. And same thing with Kosovo, same thing with other parts of the region. We just have to acknowledge that by talking about 5,000 years of history is one thing, and looking to the future might be another thing, and that's what we have to do. We are never going to solve anything otherwise, right? But thanks for your input.
I think while we are talking here, the Ukrainians are defending themselves, partly also for values that we share, and we don't know yet what is the outcome. But maybe you will say, I'm optimistic, but maybe it will happen that Russia will kind of lose its strength after this war. And this will have a consequence. You were talking about the grip that Russia has on the whole Caucasus. If Russia is weakened through economic means or other means, what consequences will it have for the Karabakh conflict, for relationship between Georgia and Abkhazia? I would be interested what maybe you say it's too much speculation.
It is a lot
Yeah.
of speculation, of course, but it's a fair point. Anybody on you want to comment on this maybe?
It might, again, it's speculation, but still it might depend on the path of which path, if the Russia weakens, which kind of path these countries are going to take. If they are going to take a reimagining, reintegration to West, and so Europeanizing and so democratizing their institutions, it would be easier to achieve peace altogether. But it could be the other way around. I mean, still, we see that how energy dependence of EU to Russia contributed to the current situation. It's important to acknowledge that EU has a more limited, but still some energy security dependence on Azerbaijan. So over the past 15 years, for example, what EU stands towards Azerbaijan showed that the one-man rule in the country is acceptable as long as there is this, energy cooperation between these two. This needs to change. I mean, EU and the West and the Switzerland, they need to reinstate their image, their reputation as a more attractive actors for this region, because not only the peace between these countries, between these, ethnic groups, but also the democratic and prosperous future of these countries are depending on that. That would be.
Well, I think that we'll see what the future. The only question is, will a Russia that is that feels threatened also by these sanctions, by growing isolation, will that be a more peaceful Russia? I doubt it, really. I think despite everything, and this sounds maybe now a little strange given the current situation, I think we should have Russia as a partner in Europe, some way or the other, some way, because it's going to stay our neighbor and it's close. So we better have some relations, some kind of relation, working relations with Russia, rather than have an isolated Russia, which is going crazy. And Russia is not Putin, of course. And, change could also come from within, although that's a very long way.
Can I just add shortly? Lots of my friends in St. Petersburg and Moscow were, they were going out to protest, and then they were caught and for several days, some of them for 20 days. So I just wanted to say that many people are against what's happening right now, and I think that imposing measures, isolating measures from the EU towards all the Russians it would be completely unreasonable. I think that's what to support your maybe point of view, right?
Okay. Are there more questions? Maybe. Yeah, I see one. Two over there. Thank you.
We read in American cultural magazines about a form of cultural genocide of the Armenians in Azerbaijan, where tombs and churches and houses, the names are being changed, and to some extent demolished. Is one that aware of that in Azerbaijan, or is this something which just comes to us?
Unfortunately, in Azerbaijan, but I think this is a mutual problem between Azerbaijan and Armenia societies as well. There is a limited acknowledgement, limited awareness of each other's culture. Before the war, before the collapse of Soviet Union, but even before that, there was a big Armenian community in Azerbaijan. And naturally, there were churches, there were cultural centers, there were a lot of architecture belonging to, Armenian heritage in Baku and elsewhere. Similarly, there was a lot of Azerbaijanis based in Armenia, and they had their own cultures, their mosques, for example. Unfortunately, before the war, what we have been seeing that these two countries are undermining each other's cultural past presence. And this is one of the actually obstacles in achieving peace. I am aware that Azerbaijani official discourse, some of the Armenian heritage in Azerbaijan is reframed as Albanian, heritage. Or in Yerevan, for example, some of the Azerbaijani cultural heritage is reframed as Persian heritage. This is something as an obstacle that we need as a nations to overcome. And I think in terms of the cultural, the Armenian heritage within the boundaries of Azerbaijan, there should be a lot of involvement of international experts, including experts from Armenian side, to overcome this problem of threats to the cultural heritage. That's the only way moving forward.
Right. It was another question.
Maybe not so much a question, but or some statement. I mean, there have been many massacres in this region on both sides, but I think historians know that's some more on Azerbaijani side. But what I wanted to say, we are talking about boycotts, but we also must admit that even Switzerland is contributing to conflicts, even in peacetime. Aliyev, like Putin, is investing very much oil and gas money into the army. And Switzerland is dealing a lot with Aliyev. We are buying very much oil and gas by Sokar, by the company of Sokar. And during the war, we were aware suddenly that we contribute to that conflict. And even Migros, our big store, is selling in the Migrolino their things, and that's not so. I'm ashamed a little bit of that fact. Right. We should not contribute and not buy from dictatorships oil and not dealing with them.
Yes. Well, we won't have any oil and gas if you count all the dictatorships that are right now delivering gas and oil. We should really rethink. But I agree, we should really rethink the whole concept.
I wouldn't see it as only in the context of conflict, but in general, like the political development in Azerbaijan. The civil society in Azerbaijan, the pro-democracy opposition in Azerbaijan have been saying this to Europe like for decades, that like you are actually emboldening this authoritarian regime by entering to any business relation to them.
Okay. Well, are there any more questions?
I would like to ask about opposition. We always hear about opposition in Russia, and how in your countries, how vital is your opposition?
Yeah, brief answers. Maybe.
Well, in our country, it's very super vital, and the opposition is basically the civil society itself. So these are the people. They are now in their 60s. Who were at the very start of making this humanitarian exchange with the NGOs, European NGOs in the 90s, and then they became the really moral leaders of the society. And then there are youngsters who are working mostly in the NGOs or in some cultural institutions and so on. But the society is so small, and everyone knows each other very well that even if people oppose each other, they still kind of
they have to get along, like in Switzerland, probably. Right? They have to get along somehow.
Yes, true.
Well,
so that's my answer.
So maybe Nino. What about opposition in Georgia?
Well, opposition obviously is very, very important, but in Georgian case, we have to consider that opposition and the government has not been able to reconcile for the last 2 years since the last parliamentary election. We have been having this, what people sometimes find it easy to call political crisis. And so opposition is also in this way vital in these times of crisis, of any crisis, but in this case, the crisis which is related to multi-party parliament. But lately, I have to admit, my impression is that people have been asking for more from the opposition. They've been asking for, more blatant, more prevalent steps from the opposition since society is observing, not being represented from the government. So in this case, I think the need and the importance of opposition is only gonna rise in Georgia.
I think your answer is going to be very short.
Yeah, opposition has been certainly very much weakened, and they have never been ideological in response to the existing government. But it's important to acknowledge the opposition, pro-democracy opposition and the civil society has been the key actors in terms of preventing the country from transforming it to a full-scale dictatorship. I mean, they
Same thing to Abkhazia.
That's
Well, that's important.
In crucial moments, they really make the influence. They can go to the president. They can do, and they can influence him not to close the NGOs as Russia, for example, demands each year, or not to change the law and start to sell the land and start to sell the houses to the foreigners, including Russia, the primary partner. So they really kind of preserve this, the culture in the society. Yeah.
Right. So I think okay, I see another question there, but let's see how it goes. Very short, Brit.
Yes, maybe you can just sum up what makes a conflict in general in Kaukasus difficult to solve. Like, is it Russia's interests? I'm still going to the past because I think it's important to understand the past so that we can look to the future.
Right.
And I also understand your point that it's important to have diplomatic relationships with Russia, for example, between Abkhazia and Russia, though it will be better. And I also understand that Abkhazia wants to be independent. That is also, it's acceptable. But just can you sum up this conflict and difficulties?
If Jeronim wanted this to be brief, maybe we can just name Russia.
We sum up. I think it's from what we heard right now, it's that there is a civil society, there are people-to-people contacts, but it's a very long way to go, I think. And what I also heard is that Europe, or let's say the collective West, if you want, should be more engaged. They might be afraid now to be more engaged, to be honest, but they should not step back. I'm not talking about military. I'm talking about everything else. I think that's important. And also I think what is important that we start to rethink what we are doing when we are dealing with these countries, with some of these authoritarian states. We have leverage, and maybe we should use that. But I think if this conflict in Ukraine tells us anything, is that we should actually think more about what's going on what I would now call, let's say, the periphery of Europe, right? Because we don't really. We are, I wouldn't say we ignore it, but we tend to say, well, we have troubles of our own, let's just focus on different things. We had 8 years to solve the problem of Eastern Ukraine. I mean, I say we, everybody. We didn't do anything. And now we have a huge escalation. I'm not saying we could have prevented it. Nobody knows. But what if we had done more? Maybe there would have been a different outcome. And we shouldn't let that happen to other conflicts that are still boiling or still have a potential to spill over. maybe that's one lesson, I hope a positive lesson that we can get from what is happening now in Ukraine. If there is anything we can learn, and we should learn, and we should learn very fast, actually. I think, I know there's been another question, but I think we have to conclude. I think we are already stepped over the time. I'm sorry, but I think it was very interesting, and I want to really thank the participants and the audience for these interesting discussions and for your questions. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to add some few more words. Thank you, Nasta, Agrba, Nino, Gozalishvili, and Najmin Kamilsoy for being here. Vielen Dank, Jeronim Perović. Und ich habe gedacht, als ich Ihnen zugehört habe, I thought when listening to you that when we decided to do this festival, we knew it was complicated, we knew it was a lot of conflict, we knew it would be risky to invite people from Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia. And I think it's good you're here, that we have the books, that we have the texts to talk about, that we read and we start talking to each other. So, and we'll continue to do this over this weekend. There is a book table outside with many books. I suggest you buy them, you read them the next days. And what's happening next year is we have a panel about contemporary literature from Azerbaijan at 4:30. There is not so many translations into German. We invited cultural scientist and historian Elnura Jivazada. She lives actually in Berlin, and she translated some texts, especially for the festival, some very beautiful texts, so it's worth staying and listening to them. And then at 8 o'clock, we have a reading with one of the great poetic voices from Armenia, with Violet Grigorian, very bold experimental texts, also strongly suggested to listen to that. And we continue tomorrow with the last panel at 11 o'clock with the title, Who If Not Literature, about what art can do, what authors can do in times of crisis, and do they have to do something, and what do we do about that? So that's what's happening next. Thank you, and I think we'll be around for all the not asked questions from the public. So, good continuation.
Thank you.
It's right after this, right?
Yes, I will go upstairs and
Thank
I will
you.
speak.
Thank you.
Question, hope it's okay for you.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nino. Take care.
I told Najmin that a friend of mine here, Swiss one, invited me to a party. So he will also text you about this later if you are better, okay? So maybe you can join and it will be cool, okay? I know I had this when I was, teenager, I had this when I was a teenager,
This is from preparation. So, yeah, thank you.